Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. As you know, this is a webinar by the National Down Syndrome Society, and we are the leading human rights organization for all individuals with Down syndrome. Go to the next slide.
Oh. Sorry, we're not moving here. What am I doing wrong, Sarah? Oh, there we go.
It is my honor to introduce Professor Sue Buckley. Dr. Buckley is a psychologist, emeritus professor at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. Dr. Buckley is the Director of Science and Research for Down Syndrome Education International and has been researching, reading, and teaching since 1980. Dr. Buckley is also a member of NDSS's Inclusive Education Task Force. Dr. Buckley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, Joe, for inviting me. And it's an honor to be contributing both to the Inclusion Task Force and to be presenting to you today. So I'll go straight ahead, yes?
Yep, go ahead.
Right. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do for you all today is raise all the key points and principles that I think people need to understand about literacy education for students with Down syndrome. And literacy, of course, I'm really going to focus on teaching children to read because that's what we want them to be able to do. But of course, literacy involves benefiting from books and reading, and it's really important for children who are not reading independently. And we'll come back to that later. Okay. Now, when I first started out, as it said on the last slide, very early on in being interested in children learning to read, it was because I had a father write to me, and my attention was drawn to some case studies where parents had taught their children to read in their preschool years. Now that's back in the 80s. Now there's a lot of published research, okay? And so the published research shows that reading ability is often a strength. And what I mean by that is the children's reading age, in inverted commas, the level at which they're reading, is frequently better than you would expect for their cognitive progress or mental age and their language ages. They're reading better than we might expect. Now, one of the things around that, well, first of all, that means it's really important to never to develop it. It builds on the children's visual learning strengths. And I expect most of you listening know there's a lot of work on working memory and how children with Down syndrome learn. And in working memory, there's a verbal short-term memory system and a visual short-term memory system. And for youngsters with Down syndrome, the visual system works better. And one of the reasons why their spoken language is delayed is because verbal short-term memory is more delayed than it should be, compared again to general mental age. So we're making language visual when we look at print, okay? And we're going to build on their visual learning strengths. For that reason as well, we can use print to develop spoken language. And we can do that for non-readers as well, because we can make little books at the right language level that we read together. So we can use print to develop children's language even when they're not readers. And it's particularly important, we would argue, to make books for the children who are the most delayed and may not be going to be reading independently, both for the reason I've just said, because we can make books to develop their spoken language and read them together, but also we can make books to record what they're learning in the classroom, the topics they're covering. Because if we don't make books, there's no material that's you're going to go back to help them with their learning. Now, I try not to talk too much, so there's plenty of time for questions, but I'm going to pick up on these various points as we go. What you most want to know, I suspect, if you're listening to me, is how do we start teaching children to read? What are the principles? Well, broadly, the first sentence on here should say the same principles as other children. All children learn sight vocabulary, particularly when they're learning English, because many words are irregular. You can't actually sound them out and work out what they are. We all learn high-frequency words by sight and many other words by sight. And as adults, we read by sight. The brain recognizes the visual pattern of the word instantly. Now, we're going to start with the sight vocabulary then. And many children find it really quite easy. And you'll see the little girl in the picture is doing this in the way we tend to teach it. She's matching identical words. We're giving her a word and she's finding the one the same on the sheet, starting with matching. And I'll talk about matching, selecting and naming on a later slide. So starting with sight vocabulary, making sure always the child understands what they're reading. So we would use words and sentences that are at the child's language comprehension level. We're going to choose words to start with we know they understand and can either say or sign. And then they'll learn the printed version for that word. So it needs to be at their language comprehension level, or they're not going to understand what they're reading. They may learn lots of sight words and be very accurate at telling you what they are, but not understand them, and not understand them when they're put into sentences, not understand the meaning of the sentence. So we read for meaning. There's no point in learning to read unless you can understand what you read. So that is a real headline to keep in mind. We're teaching children to read so they understand what they read and they can move forward. We would make books because that's linked to the last point. Many storybooks are going to be too complicated for younger children. They're going to be ahead of their language level. So we would always make simple books with the vocabulary we're teaching and link it to the child's life experiences. They love pictures of themselves doing things, whether that's activities out of school or whether it's topic work, curriculum work in school. We're also going to teach letter sounds, okay? But we would get started by making sure a child can read 30 or 40 words by sight, can read them in different sentences and definitely understands what they're reading. Okay. Alongside, many of our children will have learnt the letter sound correspondences, by which I mean that it's t, p, k. We don't teach letter names first in the UK. The important thing for reading is letter sounds, okay? So many of our children will know what the sound is that goes with the letters. And then we will play phonological awareness games. So which words start with t? Can you find a word that starts with p? Okay, or can you see something that starts with p? So listening for sounds in words is phonological awareness. Can you listen for words? Can you tell me what pat would be if we take off the p? Okay. can you tell me which words end with the same sound, and so on. That's listening to sounds in words when you're talking. That's phonological awareness. That's quite difficult to develop, and you need phonological awareness to move into phonics and figure out how letters and sounds work in words. And again, I'll come back to that. But the point I'm stressing is our children will learn their letter sounds in the UK at 4, but we won't be trying to get them to decode words. That's really quite tricky. Okay, you have to be able to listen to the word dog and think for yourself, that's d, o, g. Okay, or sound it out, sound the letters out, d, o, g, and put them back together to make dog. That's quite a complicated activity. And children will know all their letter sounds a couple of years before they can do that. But we do want them to progress because you need it for spelling and writing. Okay. Now, I've hinted at this already. We would start early because of our early work showing 3-year-olds can begin to learn to read. So many children can learn to read printed words from as young as 3. We still use the same principles to teach them when they're older. However, we still start with sight words and words that are interesting and meaningful to them. And the match, select, read, comprehend is to start with what you can see that little boy doing. He's putting dog with dog. When the child can match the words correctly, we then say to him, can you show me dog? Can you show me mum? That's the selecting stage. And now we know he's recognizing the word when in print, when he hears you say it. The next stage is you just show him the card. Can he read it to you and tell you it's dog or mum? And then we would make sure they can read it and put it on a correct picture. So when they read dog, they can put it on a picture of a dog. When they read mum, they can put it on a photo of mum. So matching, selecting, reading, and making sure they're understanding. Now, the example I've used, because of the picture, is single words, but we apply exactly the same principle to learning sentences. You read the sentence and put it on the correct picture to make sure you've properly understood it. Okay. And many of you will know we produce a See and Learn language and reading program that is designed for the little ones and starts at the stage children are beginning to understand and put together 2-word phrases like big dog, mummy drinking, and so on. Okay, and there's a free video. You can see how that works by looking at the video that's on our website, and the references for that are at the end of the slide set. Now, I can't stress enough, of course, that the focus of teaching reading, like everything else, is to make it fun and to make sure the child's understanding what they're doing. And in order to do that, we would push an errorless learning approach. We don't know which children are going to take off at 3 or at 5 or at 9, okay? But if we set about doing this in an errorless way, what I mean by that is you're going to sit down with your child and show them what to do. So the example of the little boy in the picture, we would hand him the card that says dog and say, put dog with dog. And if he's hesitating, we would hold his hand and direct him to get it right. Okay, so we're going to prompt correct answers. So we're going to do it together until we can fade those prompts. So it's always fun, and we always end up having completed a task successfully. Because if you give up partway through, the child doesn't understand what you're asking them to do. So that errorless learning approach applies across the board. But and of course, the only way, all the research studies, including our own, say we couldn't predict which children were going to take off with our reading programs. So the only way to find out is give them a chance to learn. And you may be surprised because some of the children who seem the most delayed will be the children with the poorest verbal short-term memory. Okay, they'll have the biggest learning difficulties. And you may find that making stuff visual really helps because, of course, when you talk, the words are instant. You either catch it or you don't. If you're looking at it in print, it stays there for you to continue to look at it. So you've removed that short-term memory load. Okay, so you may be pleasantly surprised that less able children, in inverted commas, are actually perfectly capable of making progress with reading. But if we're going, and that's why the errorless approach is important, because the only way to find out is to give the child a chance, but not set them up to fail. Okay. So build a sight vocabulary, help the children to join words together. And again, that illustration is just that. There's the boy putting a sentence together with printed word cards, okay. And this would be entirely at the level we'd expect the child to be at. So we would start with 2 keyword books with mummy eating, daddy eating, Billy eating, dog eating, okay? Just as children talk, they use single words and they put 2 words together without all the grammatical bits, the joining words and word endings, and then they start to build grammatical sentences, okay? And for children with Down syndrome, the grammar's a real challenge. They may not hear it all when you're talking, okay? We don't stress the grammatical words like he is running, okay? But you see it all in print. So we'd slowly work to introduce the grammar in developmental order, the way we know children usually learn. And it's linked, of course, to what they understand and what they want to talk about at each step. Then, as I've said already, we would teach letter sounds. Now, again, some of you may well know that we run a speech sound program in the See and Learn programs. We actually start to teach children to listen to letters and listen to speech sounds and learn to link them with a picture from the first year of life, because sound discrimination is absolutely critical for learning to talk and for developing that short-term memory. So teaching sound discrimination and then to link sounds to the letters goes on early, both in our program and children in school in the UK. And it's not only needed for phonics, I've said this already, get ahead of myself, it's important for that verbal short-term memory. That verbal short-term memory is specialised for holding spoken language. So if I say the dog is chasing the cat, you have to hold that in memory while the brain processes it for meaning. Now, the child's working memory system has to tune to the sounds of the language in the country that they're born. They don't know whether they're going to arrive in Iraq or Russia or America or France. They have to tune, their brain has to learn the language that they're listening to. And the better you can discriminate the speech sounds, the better your verbal short-term memory. And of course, you can't learn words if you can't hear the difference between hat, cat, and mat. Only one sound, consonant sounds that you need to be able to discriminate. So it's really, really important. And that I may start to confuse you, but teaching school-age children the letter sound correspondences, even if you don't think they're going to decode words for reading or spell on their own, it's still worth doing it, okay? Speech sound discrimination and playing games where you listen for the sounds in words and you see all the words that start with B, that may well help children's speech clarity and their short-term memory development, even if they don't get to use it independently for reading. Okay. So in school, we'd apply the same principles we've talked about for the preschoolers, a meaningful sight vocabulary. And here I should say I'm driven crazy by Dolch lists and high frequency words lists. Now they're fine, and we suggest you teach them in our own reading programs, but not in isolation, okay? Many of the high frequency words are grammatical and have no meaning outside sentences. So they're very difficult for all of us, including adults. We read meaningful words faster than non-meaningful or non-imageable words, okay? So same principles, but a meaningful sight vocabulary, and those grammatical words are best learned as part of sentences. And as I say, I get very worried when I go in and see the child's got 20 high frequency words and you couldn't make a sentence of them. So what are we doing? What does the child think they're doing? Okay. So words for sentences, short sentences, books about the curriculum. This doesn't have to be a lot of extra work, but you must always build in activities to support comprehension. Books that children have helped you make about something they're doing, they're going to read back and understand. Story material is much more difficult for comprehension. And you can ask why later if you want to, but we can progress. We need to think about making books for all the things children are learning in school and read them with them, as well as teaching them to read them. So a balanced approach of learning sight words, learning phonics, but in the context of successful book reading. And I'm going to come on to talk about RLI, our reading and language intervention, where that is the key. You have a book, the child reads a book successfully every day, and you make those books so easy, it's bound to be successful. So you might make a starting book with just the family names and pictures of the family in. And you would prompt that to start with till they've learned it. But they understand why they read. why they're learning to read. You're not doing sight words or phonics activities completely out of context with the child having no idea why you want them to learn this. What you're doing, the sight words you're teaching, the initial sound work you might be doing is always in the context of the book they're learning to read. Okay, so they have an easy book that they can already read at the start of every reading lesson. They choose that from a little group of books they build up, and then the book that you're teaching them to read, new sight words, phonics work, is linked to that book. Okay, and again, of course, we would link this with language learning. It's got to be at the language level, and of course, reading together, supported reading where the child may actually be copying you, is helping them to practice talking in sentences. Okay, now RLI then, which I've already started to mention, is an evaluated intervention, and again, many of you may know about it. What you may not all know is it's the only piece of research where a randomized control trial, the gold standard of research, has been run for an educational intervention. Okay, so we had 50-odd children in this study. And you can read all about it on our website. I've put the links again at the end. It's an individualized program. So it's based on the best practice that I've just described. You're going to have book reading, sight word reading, and you're going to learn about phonics and how sounds work in words, spoken and printed words. It's based on best practice for teaching any child to read. Okay, these are the principles for teaching any other child to read. It's one-to-one teaching. It does require 25-minute, 30-minute lesson one-to-one for the reading strand and another 25 or 30-minute lesson for the spoken language strand. We did both things together. Okay, we were targeting both reading and spoken language development. Now, although there's a structure, the program is individualized for every child. You assess the child on a series of assessment sheets we give you. You are going to work at the pace of that child. You know exactly what sight words they can already read and which new ones you're teaching them. You know exactly what letter sounds they already know and which new ones you're teaching them. So we're building all the time on success. Lots of repetition, small steps, specific targets, okay, which will be individual for each child. So whether they're going slowly or fast, it's individualized to them. And I've stressed already, it's always linked to book reading. And on the language strand, we take a topic over 2 weeks. And that could be a curriculum topic in school. And we make a topic book as we go. So again, that could be linked to simply a curriculum topic in school. But with the focus for the language teaching and for children to record their work, where they're starting to record their own work, our emphasis would be to ask the child what they want to put down on the page. And they may give you 2 key words like play sand or plant seed. You'd help them make that into the shortest grammatically correct sentence and put it in the book. But it must be what they're thinking about and what they want to say. And then we will also bring their language forward. So it does need the one-to-one teaching, specific targets, small steps, and graded books. Now, we use a finely graded system for finely grading books that had already been developed for slow readers in the UK. And we did this study with world-leading reading experts, Margaret Snowling and Charles Hugh, who are both now at the University of Oxford. We evaluated it, as I said, in the UK with a randomized control trial. It's all published in a journal. And then we piloted it out in Texas and San Antonio. And we're pleasantly surprised at how easily it was taken up in US schools. Okay, and you can ask me more about that. We have some US-based accredited trainers that we can put you in touch with. Okay. Now, I've said this already. We can't predict which children will take off, so we always need to try to teach them. And I've stressed already the small steps, errorless learning, no failure. And I would apply that at any age. It's the same with older children. We don't want to set any child up to fail. For older children, the teenage topics may be different things. We might have a teenager who's really keen on a baseball team or a basketball team or a rugby team, or I don't know, goes climbing or is a great swimmer. We'd ask them to choose a topic that they'd like for a first book and learn sight vocabulary and look for pictures online or in magazines of their favorite baseball team and the people in it. We'd make a simple book that's really something they're interested in. We'd make sure it's not too many sight words. We would learn them, if you like, by repetition, right? Lots of repetition. So this child or teenager can open the book and read it correctly aloud. Because then they get the sense of being a reader. I'm a real reader. I understand reading. We know at this point they don't know about phonics and so on. Not bothered. You're going to build on success. If you've got one small book you can read on a topic you're really interested in, then we can move on from there. We can show them from the words they can read which words all start with M, with a M, or which words end with T or ED, and so on. We work forward, but always from success, okay? So the same, and as I say, with older children, we'd pick something they're interested in, and we'd probably use the computer to make this interesting, because often if they're teenagers and they haven't been doing any reading, they've failed already. They've had the experience of somebody trying to teach them and they didn't get it. So we want to come at it differently. Small steps, errorless learning, no failure. I've said that at least 3 or 4 times now. Reading together, and that's what we mean by the supported reading. For a child who isn't making progress, we can still make these books and we read them together. And then, of course, they may move on, especially if they've got favourite books, they will learn them by repetition. We want, of course, to record activities. We want to record the learning in the classroom, and we want to put topics in books. And I said it right at the start, I'm repeating myself, it is most important for those most delayed non-readers. Otherwise, what record have they got of what they're learning every day in school? Do they have a record of what they've been learning that we can go over again with them? We would call that revision in the UK. Lots and lots of repetition is needed for learning. A piece of research just published out of the University of Lancaster, which is just down the road from where I live now, has recently shown in an experimental setting that more repetition was needed for youngsters with Down syndrome to learn associations between 2 items, but they could be as good as the children who were not delayed if they were given enough opportunities, enough practice trials to learn. Okay, so this issue of more repetition and being very clear, very targeted about what we're teaching is really important. But I'm muddling the message. I'm also saying that for the very delayed child who perhaps you don't expect to read, books that you read to them and with them with the appropriate pictures in are hugely important for their learning. Okay, and they provide a record of the learning that they've been doing so we can return to it. Now, writing, I've focused all the time at the moment on reading, and of course, again, across all children, children can be better readers than writers. Now, writing, we need to be very clear. People use the word writing to cover 2 things. Handwriting, can we write something down? And how do we develop children's handwriting so that we can read it? We put that to one side. Putting thoughts on paper, of course, is why you want to be able to write. So can you build a sentence or put your thoughts on paper? And you don't want to hold children back from doing that because they can't write. And it's common, if we're not careful, to see children, all sorts of children, get behind in the classroom because they can't write fast enough. So they're getting left behind, whereas they know what they want to put down, but they can't do it as fast as other children. So we would start again with our no failure, errorless learning. And that's an example from years ago, that book at the top. There's all the words to make the sentence. And so you're asking the child, where is the train going? The answer's on the other picture. The train is going up the hill. The child's only got to put those words in order. They can match them to the sentence. So again, you're ensuring they can get it right because all the prompts are there. And then you might do part of the sentence and they've got to put 2 of the words in the right place. Okay, so you might give them the sentence, can they complete it? You working to the stage where you can give them the words jumbled up and they can make the sentence without any help. So we'd work at, in this errorless behavioral way where you're fading the prompts, giving children success all the time, but providing them with the tools to make sentences, okay, to tell you what they're thinking and what they want to put down. And of course, the technology does that. Programs like Clicker, there's lots of software which, you know, we've got in many different countries, clickers expanded all over the place, where you can make talking books. You click on the pictures and it gives you the words in the sentences at the simplest level and then reads them to you. So you want to make full use of all the technology that's out there. And all our children get pretty good at the technology if they have a chance. Handwriting then, the actual learning to write takes lots and lots of practice. It's a motor skill, comes with practice. And many children take several years in school to get anywhere near legible handwriting. And it is where you need to remember that our children develop more slowly. They develop more slowly. It takes them as long as 2 years to make the progress another child might make in a year. Now, that's a rough rule of thumb, okay, and I'm generalizing. But sometimes we're just impatient. We need to give them enough time to get there. But also motor skill, it's practice. It takes lots and lots of practice. Speaking takes practice. Making letters takes practice. It won't just happen if the child doesn't practice. And we know our children need more practice than other children, okay? And of course, there's the issue of teaching them to type rather than struggling with handwriting. How much handwriting do the people listening to me now actually do? Right, so a bit more about making the full use of technology, which I've probably already said. Computer programs like Clicker, bookmaking programs like Special Stories, which is a UK app, or Pictello, which is really very sophisticated and can be used to support lots of book building and language teaching and literacy work. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Screens build on the children's strengths. They're visual learners. They love screens. Okay. As I'm sure, again, most of you listening to this know. Sometimes they love screens just to play with the things they want to. But we can harness that and use this visual learning strength by developing computer programs that really take them through the steps. So they build on their strengths. They're visual learners. Also, when they can use either a touch screen or a mouse or type, if the learning is coming up on the screen and they have to make a response like choose the right picture, it's at their pace. Now, youngsters with Down syndrome process information a little bit more slowly. And very often we prompt them just as they're going to get it right. When you ask them a question, give them more time, okay? We need to let them go at the pace that works for them. And if they're sitting in front of a computer screen, it goes at their pace. It won't do something till they do the next thing. And it's under their own control. It's a sense of being able to control their own learning. So there's a lot of very positive things about making good use of all the computer technology and tablet technology that's available, and phone technology. Books, I've mentioned the Special Stories app and things like Pictello. And I've got here, there's absolutely no excuses. What I mean here is for teachers and assistants, there's no excuses. It's really easy to record activities in class and for parents at home. It is so easy now to take a picture on your mobile phone. Special Stories is dead easy to use. You open up the page, you drop the photo in, you can put the sentence underneath and you can record it so it reads back to the child, okay? So there's no excuse not to make books about everything children are doing. When we were doing it years ago, we didn't have this instant photography and it was much more difficult, but now there's no excuses. The technology is fantastic, okay? And I can't stress enough the importance of making these visual records of learning in class and at home as the basis for books. For teenagers, of course, social media is huge. You'll all know teenagers with Facebook pages now. They all want to use the technology. Texting, WhatsApp, Facebook. I know there's all the risks that go with it, but it's very, very powerful. I have a daughter with Down syndrome who's in her 40s. She has a partner, and he's younger than Roberta, and he got his first tablet when he was about 35 or 36. He's fantastic with it. It really spurred him on to improve his reading, to figure out how he could search for things. He can even make it work with voice recognition now. And he uses the Google Assistant to write emails. Now, this is somebody who had no terribly functional reading ability when he got out of the school system. But the availability, I mean, this tablet has transformed his life. And I know people will give you lots of other examples like that. It's never too late to introduce reading activities and to teach someone to read. Mark's just the example I've used because it's close to hand. And he really has surprised me. And he asks me to spell things if he's not sure. But of course, spell checkers help him as well. It's increased his vocabulary. He searches all sorts of interesting things online, and he WhatsApps with his family and so on. Okay, so and he's probably not going to read storybooks, but he's certainly increased his literacy skills as an adult. And we find when we're moving children into our secondary school system, that it's important that they learn to use Word. They learn to use the same software as everybody else, ready for work. And of course, you can do loads on Word and similar, PowerPoint and so on. They need to learn to access the same software as everybody else, and you can use all sorts of adaptations to make it more acceptable. Right, so I've talked too much for too long, I expect. So I've talked very fast. I hope covered a lot of key principles, and now it's time for your questions. We've got 25 minutes now where I'm happy to answer questions. And I think Sarah Jo's going to read them for me.
Yes, and for those of you on your chat bar, you're able to type in questions. Our first question is, my son did the learning program when he was little, but now he is 12 and we struggle to find a program. He has used a couple different programs, the Wilson program, and we just started Moby Max, but I'm not sure if it's working well yet. Would you start back at the learning program /RLI? Is there a recommended site for making books?
Okay. I wouldn't say you went back to the See and Learn program, which is the picture that's on your screen now. The principles still apply, but of course the content of this is for 3, 4, 5-year-olds, okay? So you could think about the principles. The reading and language intervention, we evaluated that with children from 5 to 10 years old, so in what we call our primary school system in the UK. Again, the principles could be used. And so I would say, well, so first of all, the principles are the same, okay? I would suggest you get a list of all the words your son can still read, okay? Get some idea of what sight vocabulary he's got, what letters, sounds he knows, where he's got to, what sort of simple books he's reading. I can't, and so you've got a baseline to start from, to build on what he already knows and see how much, you know, how much useful every day making of books linked to his life. Does he keep a diary when he goes out? Would he like a book about his holiday? Those are the things to think about that would motivate him at this age, okay? So I would be thinking practical again. What are the things that interest him in his life? What's the practical vocabulary that's going to be useful? So I would link it to the school curriculum and the things he's doing in his leisure time before I would start to think about storybooks, which are a much more of a challenge, okay? I know I'm making that difficult because this means you're working on these principles yourself. There probably are. I'm not sure with, I don't know the Wilson program, so I can't comment on that, or the books that you mentioned. Now, there are always books that might work quite well that are designed for readers for whom English isn't their first language. Okay, so readers getting into school where they're learning English at the same time, there are reading programs for them where the English therefore is simpler in the books. And there are, I mean, you can look at that. There are also sets of books, and I'm not familiar with all those that be available in the US, that have teenage appropriate content but simple language. So yes, by all means look for books like that, but I'm not sure there's one simple program to follow. So I'm not sure how helpful that was. In other words, I'm saying you need to think about it in terms of structuring it for your teenager. But of course, using technology, again, would be where I would look, and asking the school if they've got programs like Clicker. Okay.
Next question. What do you do when a child, 7 years old, can decode better than their comprehension?
Now, that'll be quite a common situation, okay? So thank you for that question. Um, uh, uh, Many youngsters with Down syndrome first are good at building up a sight vocabulary, so they learn lots of different words by sight, and then they can often become good at the decoding, so they build an even bigger vocabulary they can actually read, and it does get ahead of what they understand. Okay, they will learn to read words that they don't understand, and they'll learn to read sentences they don't understand. This is because, of course, you can only understand what is supported by the language that you understand. Reading's a written form of language. You can only read off the page and understand if you'd understand the same thing if it was spoken to you. So it's very easy for the child to be reading all sorts of stuff and for teachers to say, well, it's a waste of time because they don't understand what they're doing. If I'm having a bad day, I'll say to the teacher, that's your fault. What are you doing letting this child read stuff they don't understand? Now, I'm being a bit tough, but my point is you should be keeping the reading material at a level that matches this child's language comprehension level. And then you should always be teaching comprehension, okay? So as we move forward from the early stages of using everyday language we're pretty sure they understand, as you move forward, you must always be checking they understand and teaching comprehension strategies. And what I mean by that is when you start to read books, you should read the book through several times together with you reading it, and you can talk about the story together before you expect the child to read it. And once you've read it a couple of times so you both know something about the story, you can start talking about why has somebody done something in the story? Why did they do that? What do you think they're going to do next? Okay, so you can start asking children to think about and predict what's happening, which of course improves their comprehension. You can show them how to look back in the book for the answer to a question and so on. There's a list of standard comprehension strategies. There are quite a lot of other children whose reading accuracy is ahead of their reading comprehension. Those children who are learning English as a second language are often in that pool. They can read the text off the page but don't understand it all. Okay, so you've really got to focus on meaningful reading because the child will soon, well, they won't necessarily get bored. Flashing in my mind is a number of examples where I've seen children just reading off the page for fun, in inverted commas. Children with Down syndrome just reading monotonously off the page and continuing to do that day after day, although they don't understand what they're reading. Now, we don't want to let them do that. So I hope that makes sense. Where they want to read novels and current stories that everybody else is reading, you need to work to make sure they can understand the content and to simplify the stories, because obviously they want to do that. They want to do what the other kids are doing. But I hope I've put across clearly enough the message that reading comprehension is linked to language comprehension. And for our children, their language comprehension will be several years behind their actual age, be nearer half their age. Again, I don't want that to sound over depressing. And it's the processing, okay? So the language delay, but also the working memory delays. To read with comprehension, you have to be able to hold the text in mind. Any child with working memory, verbal short-term memory delays, is at risk of reading comprehension problems, okay? So language delay, working memory issues, we know our children are going to run into reading comprehension problems if we're not focused on it. Okay.
Thank you. Next question. My son is almost 5 years old with Down syndrome. Which programs from DSC do you suggest I purchase? Do you recommend Clicker as the most appropriate app for making social stories?
Okay. Now, don't take me well, let me start again. If you've got a 5-year-old progressing through reading, if we're getting them into school, we would encourage people to use the reading and language intervention approach, okay? And that's still starting for the very beginners with making simple books at their language level and moving on into graded books. But it's this balance, learning sight words, being able to read those sight words meaningfully in sentences, and so on. Okay, so the basic reading instruction we'd still be doing hands-on, if you like. Your question about social stories, we would use the Special Stories app. I mean, I like that, but it's not as sophisticated as things like Pictello, and it may be that other things are more popular in the US. Special Stories is available in the US, and very easy to use. Okay, so yes, so making these simple personal books, I'd recommend Social Stories is easy to use. Okay, hopefully I've answered that. I'm trying to say two things, aren't I? One thing's about making these personal books. The other one is at 5, we'd be doing this balanced reading approach, building the sight vocabulary, reading simple books, learning about letter sounds, which is the RLI approach. But RLI is designed to be used in school. Doesn't mean parents can't do it, but we designed it and evaluated it as a school-based reading program.
Great, thank you. Next question, you mentioned trainers for RLI in the US. Could you talk about how to connect a school with those trainers?
Yes, now, there are trainers up in Minnesota, and there are trainers in Texas, so you're going to laugh. I mean, 2 completely different parts of the US. Now, what I should do actually is send Sarah Jo the names and contact details of those trainers. And I know that the group up in Minnesota, one of the trainers is a literacy expert, and they've really taken off with using RLI in their schools. And she's quite happy to go and do training elsewhere. So, and we should get that up. We should list the trainers on our website as well, but I can let Sarah Jo have the contact details. But also, there's online training on our website. There's online training of how to deliver RLI, which is aimed at teaching assistants and teachers. But if as a parent you wanted to do that, that's the place to start. There's an online training program for educators. And then there's a second one for people who've done that and have been actually teaching children in school to become an accredited trainer. So we've tried to make all that available online so that it's easier for people in different parts of the world to get that information. And I've mentioned already, there's video presentations. There's a video presentation of RLI freely available on our website. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Great, thank you. So we have someone who says, we've tried flashcards, Fast Flash, and my son has no interest in this activity. Could you give an example of some other activities to use, or any suggestions for that?
Okay. Now, I don't use this fast flash approach. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, okay? We go in very small steps in the way you've seen in the slides. We'd get the child matching words, which they can nearly always do. They can see they're the same. The matching, selecting, naming strategy. Same as Pat Allwine in her book on reading. But I think to make it fun, again, you probably want a small number of words to make a special stories type story, perhaps on a tablet. You can print the special stories ones off into a book format. You can send them from one tablet system to another. You can do it on iOS and send it to Android. It's quite flexible in that sense. I would make something that is really fun for your little boy, okay? Some topic that he's really interested in, only a few words in the book that he can learn by repetition. So a bit like the see and learn phrases you can see on the screen at the moment. But I think you need to make it fun and focus on only teaching 4 or 5 words till he's got it. Family names nearly always work with photographs. And then you can play silly games with mummy sleeping, daddy sleeping, Billy sleeping, and so on. So there's only one new word in the next book once you know the family names. So it's small steps, but finding topics that are really fun. Okay. So hopefully that helps. And I did say to Sarah Jo earlier, I haven't put my email on this list because I obviously don't want to drown in requests, but you can, she's going to collect questions, and we do have a helpline. You can send me questions, individual questions about your children and their progress if you'd like some more help. And one thing I haven't mentioned, with our online courses, which of course are self-paced, you can do it when you like. For example, the one on preschoolers has a section on reading. One of the modules covers early reading. The one on effective education in school years has a module on reading. If you're on the online courses, you can message me anytime with your personal questions and get personal support from me. And you can extend your access. You buy for a year, but for a smaller fee, you can extend it for another year. So you've still got direct access to me if you want direct help. Okay.
Great, thank you. So, Dr. Buckley, I'm wondering, as you know, a big focus in the U.S. right now is inclusive education. So,
yeah,
how do we ensure that students are still included in schools and getting this literacy support? Is this able to be done in the gen ed classroom?
Well, yes. I perhaps should have said at the outset, our reading and language intervention trial, all the children were in regular classrooms. Now, the system is different in the UK. Virtually, at least 85% of children with Down syndrome, if not more, automatically go into a regular education classroom at 5. Okay? It's a right to be fully included. Now, it doesn't mean everything in the UK system is fine, because most of your children, if they're in special ed, will still be on a mainstream school site, what we call a mainstream regular school site. Whereas here, you're either totally in your local school or you'll be in a special school. Okay, so it's a slightly, it's different. Okay, but our reading and language intervention and our randomized control trial was in regular school. But our children are totally immersed. There is no special class to go to on site. They're in an age-appropriate general education classroom, full stop. But they will have assistants in the classroom. They may not have full-time assistant support, but most classrooms with 5, 6, 7-year-olds in have probably got 2 assistants in addition to the teacher. And the child with Down syndrome will have a delegated number of hours. So when we talk about doing an individualized 20, 25 minutes reading instruction, that's with the assistant. We trained teaching assistants in that piece of research. The teaching assistants, not trained teachers, delivered the reading, delivered the language strand effectively, backed up by teachers, speech therapists, and so on, as part of the team in school. So all our children are in regular classes, and you will know all the research says a child fully immersed in a regular class will have better spoken language, more likely to learn to read, ahead with their maths. I'm talking about children with Down syndrome. All the research that's looked at that, they learn more when they're in the classroom with everybody else. And that doesn't mean they don't get some one-to-one, but our children will be 90% learning with everybody else and maybe 10% getting some one-to-one during the day. 20% of children in a regular class are falling behind. Not those labeled. Of any group of children who go to school, 20% will be struggling readers. They all need either small group or one-to-one instruction to keep up. Okay, so all schools should be able to deliver individualized or small group instruction to any child in the classroom. It's not an either or, that you're just totally thrown in or you're out somewhere else to get you one-to-one. That's a nonsense. So all our work is with children fully included in school. We do have those special schools. We have special schools that use us to develop reading instruction programs for them as well. I'm not suggesting you don't do it. There's no excuse in a special ed classroom. It should be even easier to give the child one-to-one personalized instruction, but it isn't what happens. Okay. Yeah, anyway, you can come back at me about that.
Thank you.
And when I mentioned Texas, to just finish that off, when we went out to San Antonio, we thought the problem was going to be that the children don't get the one-to-one support. In fact, all the schools we worked with in San Antonio had no difficulty finding one-to-one. Your schools are better resourced than ours. You have special ed teachers on site, you have your separated classrooms, your resource rooms, you have many more staff in your schools than in an English primary school, okay? They found it not difficult. Special ed teachers volunteered, paras volunteered. They didn't find it difficult once we asked them to give the child that one-to-one instruction. And we ran the same sort of training as we'd run in the UK for them. And we got the same sorts of outcomes. And it was a totally diverse group of children across the range. We will have, in our studies, we've got between 10 and 20% of children reading at their age level. Now, we need to be careful. They may not always be comprehending at their age level unless we're being very careful, okay? But word reading at their age level. And yes, I mean, there is no excuse. You can hear what I'm saying, can't you? There's no excuse, whether it's in a special ed classroom or a mainstream classroom, for the child not to be getting small steps, personalised and effective literacy and language instruction.
Thank you. So a follow-up on that, something we see a lot in U.S. schools is, as for a student who needs this reading intervention, is to have this intervention replace the general ed curriculum. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, okay. Well, when we ran the actual trial, it varied, okay? On the whole, when it's any sort of pull out, if you like, I hate the word, but any sort of one-to-one, for each individual child, people are making decisions about which lesson this child can most afford to miss, if you like. So some people may have replaced it, particularly at the start. Now, you are teaching children to read, right? And so is everybody else in the classroom. If they're in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, everybody's learning to read, okay? And it may be that the pace of that literacy instruction is going too fast, so it's best to perhaps take the child into slower instruction. But with the instruction was always to go back to the classroom and link what they're doing with the literacy work in class. For other children, people felt they were benefiting from the literacy instruction. This was an extra, so they wouldn't take them out of the literacy, the language arts lessons. They'd take them from something else. Does that make sense? We let, in the study, we let the school decide at what time of day and what lesson they took them from. So it will vary, okay, according to the child. But I have pointed out already that in your average classroom, 20% of the children will be struggling with their literacy and should also be getting more small group or individual instruction. So it shouldn't be odd for a child to be getting backed up with one-to-one or small group instruction in numeracy or literacy. We should all be ashamed of the outcomes when more than 20% of your children now leave school with inadequate literacy for the workplace. It's a disgrace, because we know we can spot them early, and if we do something about it early, many of them will catch up. Now, I hope that makes sense to you. You know, we're trying to make our children different, whereas a properly inclusive school system would be flexible for any child to be getting this additional instruction, okay? So it shouldn't be either or. No, yeah, anyway, okay?
Thank you. I believe an attendee just raised your hand. If you could type your question into the question bar. I have one more question and a comment from someone. The first is, thank you so much for that question. The answer made me cry happy tears because my son is fully included. And yet I know I'll get pushback saying this type of program must be done in a special ed classroom.
Yes, okay. Yes. Well, of course, that's not acceptable. You should tell them, you know, the research showing it worked, it was done for children who are fully included.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then a question about, will this webinar be available to go back and watch and share with teachers? Absolutely. NDSS will have it posted, and you can reach out to me, Sarah Jo, for it directly. And then a question on, do you have any supports for students who speak Portuguese?
Well, I apologize profusely because I have to say no, okay? We would dearly love to be doing translations of our materials, but we simply do not have the resources at the moment to do it. Okay. It's also not simply a translation because different languages work differently in literacy. So it needs teachers to adapt the principles to the language that they're teaching. English is particularly difficult, as you probably all know. Spanish, for example, syllables work, focusing on teaching syllables, they're always pronounced the same way. So, well, the point I'm making is different languages, there are different issues about literacy teaching and language teaching. Mostly the principles would work, but the application. And we're happy to work with people who could do translations, but yes, we know we should be better at it.
And then I believe last question, how do we increase comprehension levels?
Right. Well, I started to talk a little bit about that, didn't I? I mean, what I said was there are strategies, for example, showing children how to look back for the answer in the book when you ask them a question, discussing the story, talking about why people do something, what do you think is going to happen on the next page. There are a number of comprehension strategies which are not all coming fluently into my mind, which are used for all children with reading comprehension issues. And so you want to ask about that. And I was saying to Sarah Jo before we started, we need to put a fact sheet together to go with this, listing things like comprehension strategies. Okay. We ran a very short trial, which is not yet published, where we took simple storybooks and we made the characters, cut out felt characters and stuck them on lolly sticks and reenacted the story. We had a series of strategies for the children with these simple stories to make sure they really understood the story and they could retell the story, which we could list. Okay. But really, the short answer to your question is to talk to a teacher who's used to helping children with comprehension delay, and there are a lot of them in schools. It's the same strategies. They maybe need to be done at a simpler language level for our children. Yes, so hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you so much. Just
one more comment on the comprehension. Yeah. Sorry, Sarah Jo. Factual material is much easier for children. So in factual books, of course, if you can say, you know, which animal was chasing the cat, you can look back and get the answer. Well, that's not a good factual example. All factual books are much easier, and children with dyslexia and children struggling with comprehension prefer factual books to storybooks. Storybooks are much more challenging because you're supposed to bring your life experience to understanding why things are happening and why children or adults are reacting the way they are. Storybooks draw on world knowledge, and our children will be behind with that world knowledge. So the first thing in terms of building their confidence is to use factual books with them. And that's where you overlap that with your personal books about something they've actually done, so they can recall it in real time.